Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to explore who Freddy Krueger is. One of the most malevolent, terrifying, and fascinating characters in horror cinema. Freddy Krueger is an immortal icon of the slasher genre. Freddy not only left his mark with his bladed glove, sinister laugh, and burned face, but also with his complex personality and his ability to instill terror in the one place where we are all vulnerable, our dreams. This villain, created by the mind of Wes Craven, is not a generic monster. He is the product of a tragic past, an insatiable thirst for revenge, and a dark charisma that makes him unique among cinematic antagonists. In this video, I'll explain in detail the story and origins of Freddy Krueger. To do this, I'll summarize his story across the various films, then talk about his physical appearance, his personality, and his incredible abilities and known weaknesses. Freddy Krueger is not just a fictional character. He is a metaphorical representation of what happens when pain doesn't find a proper outlet, when traumas are inherited and multiplied across generations. He was born from an atrocious act, a deeply dehumanizing event, the rape of his mother, Amanda Krueger, a nun who became trapped in a psychiatric hospital surrounded by unstable patients. This moment defined what his life would be, but not by his own choice. His existence began as the result of an act of violence and cruelty. The first thing that makes us reflect is how the context of our birth can shape our lives. Freddy was called the son of 100 maniacs, not because he chose it, but because his identity was constructed from social rejection and stigma. Imagine for a moment what it means to grow up surrounded by stares that don't see a child, but a symbol of something dark, of something society doesn't want to accept. Freddy, like many people who have grown up in adverse environments, likely never had access to a place where he could process his pain. From a young age, he was the victim of physical and psychological abuse, especially at the hands of his stepfather, who beat him with a belt. Freddy wasn't just emotionally excluded by his family, but also by a society that labeled him from childhood. Adopted by an abusive man who, according to accounts, not only beat him, but constantly dehumanized him, Freddy was subjected to an upbringing rooted in physical and psychological mistreatment. Trauma became his first teacher and pain his earliest language. The systematic abuse he endured not only left physical scars, but also shaped his perception of the world. During his childhood, Freddy began showing signs of behavioral deviation, torturing animals and inflicting pain on others. This may seem terrifying at first glance, but deep down, it's a survival mechanism. Without control over his own suffering, Freddy sought to gain control by inflicting suffering on others. In adolescence, the sadistic behavior patterns that started in his childhood intensified. His need to exert power over others turned into a habit. Freddy became the author of his own projected suffering, a reflection of the violence he had experienced. As an adult, Freddy seemingly led an ordinary life as a janitor at Springwood Elementary School. This job, at first glance, seems normal, even harmless, but it hides an unsettling subtext. Freddy used this position to gain the trust of children, the very trust he would later brutally betray. Freddy represented that duality many criminals have demonstrated, the ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while hiding their darkest intentions. This invites us to reflect on how easy it is for predators to hide in plain sight. Freddy began abducting and murdering children in Springwood, and each crime seemed to carry unsettling symbolism. Every time he took a victim's life, Freddy wasn't just satisfying his sadism, but also seeking to exert absolute power, something he never had in his childhood. Freddy chose children as his victims, perhaps because he saw them as representations of his own lost childhood. In his distorted mind, he recreated a dynamic where he was no longer the victim, but the oppressor. This pattern reminds us how unresolved traumas can lead to destructive repetition. What we suffer, we often project onto others. Freddy wasn't an ordinary killer. His sadism went beyond the physical. He took the time to create an environment of psychological terror for his victims. His bladed glove, a handmade weapon crafted with purpose, became a symbol of his desire to inflict pain in a direct and personal way. The glove Freddy designed reflects his twisted creativity. It was an instrument that combined symbolism and functionality, as if every scratch he inflicted was a mark of power. Freddy's crimes weren't just acts of violence. They were manifestations of a complete transformation. He had crossed the threshold where he could no longer see himself as a victim. He had become the Victimizer. Before his death, Freddy Krueger was arrested for his crimes, but due to a legal technicality, a poorly signed warrant, he was set free. This moment was pivotal, as it symbolized the justice system's failure to protect the innocent and deliver justice. For the parents of Springwood, his release was a mockery and a betrayal. Freddy didn't just benefit from a technical error. This error was a reminder of the suffering of the victims and their families. This raises an essential question. What happens when institutions fail in their duty to deliver justice? In Freddy's case, this failure didn't just free the criminal. It also ignited a collective fury that culminated in an extreme act, his execution at the hands of an enraged mob. After his release, the victim's parents decided to take justice into their own hands. They tracked Freddy to his hideout, where he worked as a janitor in an old boiler room. There, they trapped him and burned him alive. From the parents' perspective, the system had failed them, and they couldn't allow Freddy to keep killing. For them, his death wasn't just necessary, it was also an act of protection for others. The use of fire to kill Freddy is highly symbolic. Fire is an element that purifies but also destroys. It represents both the uncontrollable rage of the parents and their attempt to eradicate the evil Freddy embodied. However, the fire also marks the beginning of his transformation into an even more dangerous being, suggesting that actions driven by anger can have unforeseen consequences. Freddy's death wasn't quick or painless. Being burned alive is one of the most agonizing ways to die, and this detail is not trivial in his story. It reminds us that the suffering Freddy caused was symbolically returned to him. Freddy likely experienced his final moments with a mix of fear, rage, and contempt toward those executing him. This reinforces his later obsession with terror. In life, his control came from the fear he instilled in others, and in death, he became a victim of that same fear, transformed into hatred. Freddy's death was not truly the end. In the moments following his execution, Freddy was visited by entities known as the Dream Demons. These entities, drawn to his evil, offered him the chance to continue his reign of terror from the dream world. Freddy accepted, becoming an agent of eternal fear, leaving behind his human form and embracing a new existence as the Dream Master. This moment marks Freddy's transition from a human killer to a supernatural being with an even greater reach. Freddy Krueger's death not only transformed those involved, but also left an emotional and psychological legacy within the community of Springwood. This traumatic event, while it seemed to bring justice, perpetuated the cycle of fear and pain Freddy had created during his life. Once transformed, Freddy acquired a new set of abilities that made him virtually invincible in the dream world. These powers not only granted him immense strength, but also reflected aspects of his personality and the traumas that had defined him in life. Now that we know the origins of the entity known as Freddy Krueger, let's analyze his story across the various films. To do this, I will explain his evolution as a character chronologically, then discuss his physical appearance, what we know about his personality and behavior, and finally, his incredible known abilities and weaknesses. Freddy Krueger's story continues in the 1984 film A Nightmare on Elm Street. This movie, directed by Wes Craven, is the start of one of the most iconic horror franchises in cinema. But it's more than that. It introduces us to Freddy Krueger, who has now become a presence that haunts young people in their dreams, where he is practically invincible. This is where we meet Nancy Thompson, the protagonist. She and her friends begin having disturbing dreams in which Freddy appears, with his burned face, worn-out hat, and glove full of blades. What begins as simple nightmares soon turns into something far darker. Their dreams are connected, and worst of all, if they die in the dream, they die in real life. This is a terrifying concept, because how do you escape something that attacks you in the one place where you're supposed to feel safe? Your own dreams? One by one, Nancy's friends fall victim to Freddy. Fear and helplessness begin to take hold of her. But unlike the others, Nancy doesn't give up. This is where the movie shines, because Nancy is not just a teenager facing a monster. She's a young woman who decides to confront her fear instead of letting it consume her. Freddy feeds on fear. The more terror his victim feels, the stronger he becomes. Nancy realizes this and begins to take away his power, showing that even in our darkest nightmares, we have control if we choose to face them. As the story progresses, Nancy investigates Freddy's past and uncovers the truth. Her own parents were part of the group that killed him. This introduces an important reflection. How much does the past influence the present? The adults thought they had solved the problem, but by keeping silent and not confronting the consequences of their actions, Freddy became an uncontrollable force that now threatens the new generation. The climax of the film is a showdown between Nancy and Freddy in the dream world. Nancy demonstrates her bravery and ingenuity by devising a plan to bring Freddy into the real world, where he is vulnerable. Here we see her true growth as a character. Instead of running away, Nancy directly confronts the monster that has terrorized her, and in a crucial twist, she stops being afraid of him. She turns her back on him, denying him the power he so desperately needs. This act of courage breaks Freddy down, showing us that fear only holds power if we allow it to. Beyond the terror, A Nightmare on Elm Street invites us to reflect on the relationship between fear, guilt, and the past. Freddy is not just a movie villain. He is a reminder that the mistakes of the past don't simply vanish because we choose to ignore them. Nancy, on the other hand, symbolizes resilience, the human capacity to face even the most terrifying nightmares. The film teaches us that while we cannot control everything that happens in our lives, we can decide how we respond to it. In this first installment, Wes Craven not only created a memorable horror story, but also a powerful metaphor about the impact of our fears and how to confront them. Freddy Krueger becomes an iconic figure not just because of his appearance and actions, but because of what he represents. The past that cannot be buried, the fear we cannot ignore, and the nightmares we must face to regain control of our lives. The sequel to the iconic first film takes a different and risky direction. While the original showed Freddy Krueger as a force acting in the dream world, this time his goal is to invade the real world. To achieve this, Freddy finds an unexpected vehicle, Jesse Walsh, a teenager who has just moved into the house where Nancy, the protagonist of the first film, once lived. From the beginning, Jesse senses that something is wrong in his new home. Disturbing nightmares begin to haunt him, and he soon discovers they are connected to Freddy Krueger. But this time, Freddy is not just looking to kill his victims in the dream world. In a shift of strategy, he attempts to possess Jesse in order to use his body as a bridge to the real world, adding an intense psychological layer to the terror. Jesse's story reflects an internal struggle where his own fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities make him an easy target for Freddy. Here, the terror comes not just from a supernatural monster, but also from Jesse's personal conflict as he feels himself losing control. Freddy doesn't just haunt him in his dreams. He is present even when Jesse is awake, manipulating him and forcing him to commit horrific acts. One of the most interesting themes of this movie is how Freddy represents the internal demons we all face. Jesse becomes a living metaphor for what happens when we allow our fears and negative emotions to take control. Freddy, as in the first film, feeds on fear, but here he also explores a more intimate connection, the possession of one's will. It's as if he's saying, if you don't confront what haunts you, it will eventually take full control. The relationship between Jesse and Lisa, his friend and potential romantic interest, becomes the emotional core of the story. Lisa realizes something terrible is happening to Jesse and tries to help him fight Freddy. At this point, the film reminds us of the importance of not facing our battles alone. Lisa represents the support we all need when we're trapped in our own nightmares. In terms of continuity, Freddys Revenge expands on the events of the first film. The Thompson house, Nancy's home, becomes the epicenter of evil, as if Freddy's presence had impregnated the place with his dark energy. Although Nancy doesn't appear in this sequel, her legacy and her fight against Freddy still resonate in the atmosphere, serving as a reminder that evil doesn't fade away so easily. The climax of the film is an explosion of chaos, where Freddy manages to cross into the real world and terrorize a group of people at a party. It is here that Lisa demonstrates her emotional strength by confronting him directly, not with weapons or violence, but with love and determination. It is her connection with Jesse that finally gives her the strength to resist Freddy, forcing him to retreat once again. However, the ending leaves an unsettling feeling. Despite the apparent victory, Freddy makes it clear that his influence has not completely disappeared. It is a reminder that fears and traumas can return if we don't fully confront them. Although this film takes a different and more introspective approach, it continues to explore the central themes of the franchise: the power of fear, the secrets of the past, and the struggle to regain control of our lives. Freddy, in this case, is not just a killer. He is an invader seeking to take over the very essence of his victims. The third installment of the A Nightmare on Elm Street saga is a significant shift from the first two films. While the previous films focused on individuals fighting to survive Freddy Krueger in their dreams, Dream Warriors introduces a more collective and positive approach. This film is a perfect blend of horror and hope, where fear remains the main driving force, but so do willpower, mutual support, and the ability to find strength even in the worst situations. The plot centers around Kristen Parker, a young woman who, like the previous victims, begins to be pursued by Freddy in her dreams. However, Kristen has a special ability. She can control her dreams and enter the dreams of others. This is where the concept of the Dream Warriors comes into play. Instead of facing Freddy alone, Kristen joins a group of young people who, like her, are staying at a mental health facility, struggling with similar nightmares. Among these new characters are Taryn, a strong girl with a troubled past; Joey, a mute boy who is terrified of Freddy; and Kincaid, a defiant young man who, despite his tough exterior, is also deeply affected by fear. Together, they form a sort of battle team against Freddy, but with the difference that each one has their own power in the dream world. The key to this movie is the idea that the young people are capable of facing Freddy not only with the strength of their will, but also with their personal traits, which are reflected in the dream world. Taryn, for example, transforms into a stronger and bolder version of herself in her dreams, using knives as weapons. Joey, on the other hand, is able to regain his voice and confront Freddy in an emotional battle, while Kincaid uses his physical strength to challenge Freddy's invulnerability in the dream world. Throughout the film, it explores how mutual support and personal growth become the characters' greatest allies. Freddy, like in the previous installments, feeds on fear. However, in Dream Warriors, each of the characters learns to control that fear and use it to their advantage. Here, the struggle is both internal and external. They must face their own traumas and fears, but they must also unite as a group to confront the common enemy. The film features several iconic scenes that have become classics of horror cinema. For example, the confrontation between Freddy and the young people in a collective dream, where Freddy transforms into several terrifying figures. This is the last time Freddy has full control over the protagonist's dreams. Throughout this sequel, Freddy appears more vulnerable than in previous installments, and his power seems to decrease as the Dream Warriors discover how to counteract him. A recurring theme in the film is the idea of personal growth and the battle against one's own fears. The characters must confront their emotional and psychological pain, which is represented in their nightmares. In the end, Freddy is not defeated simply by external actions. He is defeated because the characters stop fearing him. Freddy's defeat becomes a metaphor for how people can regain control over their lives when they confront their own demons. The presence of Nancy Thompson is also crucial in this film. She returns as a sort of mentor for the young people at the psychiatric center, helping them understand how to face Freddy in their dreams. Nancy, who had already been the heroine of the first film, now becomes a wise figure who imparts her experience and knowledge. She shows the new characters that the only way to defeat Freddy is not to give in to fear, but to face it with courage. Dream Warriors is undoubtedly a sequel that expands the concept of the saga. While in the first two films Freddy is an individual killer who acts almost invincibly in dreams, this film changes the dynamic. Freddy no longer has absolute control, as the young people begin to become aware of their power in dreams, and the film places a strong emphasis on teamwork and mutual support. This contrasts with the previous films, where the protagonists face the threats separately, fighting alone. Furthermore, the connection with the first film is key. Nancy, who had been the first person to defeat Freddy, now plays a crucial role as a guide and figure of hope for the new heroes. This transition of Nancy from victim to mentor reflects the importance of learning from experience and using that knowledge to help others. With A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, the Freddy Krueger saga takes an interesting turn, delving even deeper into the character's mythology and his connection to the dream world. In this installment, Freddy Krueger is no longer just a killer who haunts his victims in the dream world. He becomes an omnipotent being, a master of dreams, with much more absolute control over the realms of the subconscious. Freddy is presented as a supernatural force with the ability to alter the reality of dreams at will, marking a step towards solidifying his status as a mythical figure in horror cinema. The story follows Alice Johnson, a young woman who begins having strange dreams in which Freddy becomes stronger with each victim he kills. Alice is an ordinary girl, but her connection to dreams is deeper than it seems. Soon, Alice finds herself involved in a battle with Freddy after her friends begin to be killed in their dreams. Throughout the film, Alice demonstrates personal growth as she learns to take control of her nightmares and face Freddy in a completely new way. One of the standout features of the Dream Master is the way Freddy takes control of his victims' dreams. Not only does he kill them in the dream world, but now he can enter their minds more directly and, in a way, possess their bodies or abilities. This gives him much greater power and makes him a more terrifying enemy than ever. Freddy becomes a master manipulator, able to make his victims face their own internal fears. Alice, unlike the previous characters, is not just another victim. Throughout the film, Alice discovers that she has the power to take the abilities of those who have been killed by Freddy. So each time one of her friends dies, Alice assumes their powers or traits in the dream world. This ability to absorb skills is one of the most innovative ideas in the film. In this way, Alice becomes a sort of heroine who fights with a constantly growing set of tools, making her a formidable rival for Freddy. However, the film also shows the consequences of fear and guilt. As it progresses, Alice begins to feel the weight of her losses and confronts her own internal fears. Freddy not only feeds on fear, but also plays with the guilt of his victims, making them feel responsible for the deaths of their friends. Alice's internal conflict reflects one of the recurring themes of the saga: the struggle not only against a physical killer, but also against one's own fears and emotions. One of the most notable aspects of this film is how Freddy becomes a sort of mythological figure. Compared to the previous installments, his power has increased considerably. Freddy is no longer just the man behind the glove with blades. He is transformed into an entity that manipulates dreams as if they were puppets. This change makes the conflict with him even more complex, as the dream world is presented as a more abstract and dangerous territory. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. The Dream Child is one of the most intriguing entries in the A Nightmare on Elm Street saga, as it marks a turning point in the series by focusing on a completely new aspect of Freddy Krueger's mythology, the connection with procreation and legacy. This film introduces a dynamic that had not been seen before, focusing on Freddy's future and his connection to the children of the victims who have fallen under his power. The story follows Alice Johnson, the heroine from the previous film The Dream Master, who is now a mother. Alice has overcome many challenges throughout the saga, but in this film, she faces a new challenge: her son, Jacob, who is connected to Freddy in a deeply personal way. Jacob is, in fact, Freddy's son, which introduces a surprising twist in the narrative. Freddy, as the Dream Master, is no longer just a killer seeking revenge. He now becomes a corrupted father figure who seeks to regain control over his own legacy. Throughout the film, it is shown that Freddy is trying to take Jacob's soul and use him as a vessel to return to the real world and continue his killing spree. However, Jacob is not an ordinary child. Despite being Freddy's son, he has a special connection to dreams and a much greater resistance than Freddy anticipates. This gives Jacob the possibility to challenge his own father in the dream world and become a key figure in the fight against Freddy. One of the most unique aspects of the Dream Child is the exploration of inheritance and legacy. Freddy, as a villain, has remained a vengeful being who haunts the new generations of the Elm family. However, with the introduction of Jacob, we are presented with the idea that the fears and traumas of one generation can be passed on to the next. Jacob, as Freddy's son, represents the possibility of a new generation of nightmares, but also the possibility of redemption. Throughout the film, we see how Jacob struggles with his destiny, searching for a way to overcome the curse that has been placed on him since his birth. Alice, on the other hand, must face the guilt of being a mother and the responsibility of protecting her son from the same monster that had already hunted her. Alice must overcome her fear and insecurity and learn to guide Jacob so that he does not follow the same destructive path as his father, Freddy. As the film progresses, we see Alice trying to help her son take control of his dreams and his life while battling Freddy and the forces of evil he represents. In terms of style, The Dream Child continues with the psychological horror approach of the previous films, but introduces more elements of dark fantasy. The film has a more surreal atmosphere, where the boundaries between reality and dreams are even more blurred. The dreamscapes are more extravagant and psychedelic, giving way to a greater exploration of the macabre, the grotesque, and the strange. Freddy remains a terrifying figure, but in this installment, his distorted father persona adds an additional layer of complexity. With Freddys Dead, the final nightmare, the Freddy Krueger saga reaches what, for a time, seemed to be its definitive conclusion. This film is presented as the closure of Freddy's story, although, as expected, the terror of the saga would continue with future installments. However, Freddys Dead offers a unique narrative, blending horror elements with a more surreal tone and a focus on the character's origin. The movie begins with an interesting twist. Freddy Krueger is dying. After haunting the residents of Elm Street for so long and becoming an icon of horror, Freddy faces his end. But not before going through a series of revelations about his own origin and personal history, which adds a deeper layer of mythology to the saga. The story follows John Doe, an amnesiac man who escapes Freddy's dreams. At first, John doesn't know who he is or how he got there, but he soon discovers that he is a survivor of a series of murders linked to Freddy Krueger. John finds himself in a world where Freddy is still hunting the last young people left alive on Elm Street. And together with other characters such as Rose, Spencer, and Carlos, they must face the monster in a final attempt to defeat him and free themselves from his terror. A Nightmare on Elm Street 6. Freddys Dead is characterized by a more camp and self-aware approach compared to the previous entries. Freddy becomes a caricature of himself, with a greater amount of black humor and sarcastic remarks, creating a lighter atmosphere amid the action and horror. However, the essence of what makes the character terrifying is not lost. His ability to manipulate dreams and use his victims' nightmares as a playground. The main focus of this film is Freddy's origin. The movie finally reveals Freddy Krueger's backstory, showing his dark past as a serial child killer. Freddy was eventually captured and killed by the parents of his victims, but his soul was trapped in limbo, and as a result, he gained supernatural powers in the dream realm. The fact that Freddy was once a real person who committed horrific crimes adds an extra layer of horror to the saga. It is in this context that Freddy becomes not only a killer in dreams, but also a cursed figure who keeps returning time and time again to seek revenge. One of the most shocking revelations is that Freddy has a daughter named Catherine Krueger, who becomes one of the keys to defeating him. Freddy, who throughout the films has been portrayed as a completely evil figure, is now seen as a man with a tragic origin who has been destroyed by his own sins. The inclusion of Freddys Daughter adds an emotional dimension to the film and offers a small dose of redemption for a character who had long been the epitome of evil. The final battle with Freddy is a confrontation between what remains of his humanity and the monstrosity he has created. By the end of the film, Freddy is defeated in the dream world, and the cycle of terror seems to have ended. This defeat is symbolic of a deeper form, as he faces his own past and the lack of redemption that accompanies his monstrous legacy. In terms of connection with the previous installments, A Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Freddys Dead closes many of the narrative threads that had been left open in the earlier films. It delves into Freddy's origin, giving the character a new perspective. He is no longer just a figure of terror, created by fear and revenge, but a man who committed atrocities and was consumed by his own sins. The revelation of his daughter introduces a personal and emotional element that contrasts with Freddy's purely vengeful nature in the earlier films. Moreover, the movie maintains the tradition of the dreamlike elements that have been essential to the saga. Dreams are still the domain where Freddy has his power, but in this installment, the dream world is even more grotesque, surreal, and distorted. The visual style of the film is much more exaggerated and stylized, as Freddy becomes a sort of tragicomic figure. The return of surviving characters from previous films, such as Alice from the fifth movie, though more tangential, also serves to give a sense of continuity. While the direct connection to previous characters is not explored in depth, the fact that Freddy was defeated by previous generations and is now facing his own mortality gives a sense of closure. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is one of the most innovative and metafictional entries in the A Nightmare on Elm Street saga. Directed by Wes Craven, the original creator of Freddy Krueger, this film marks a reboot of the franchise, but in a completely different way. Instead of continuing the story of the same Freddy, Craven decides to break the fourth wall and delve into a meta-cinematic narrative in which the characters from the previous films face a version of Freddy himself, but in a context that blurs the line between the real and the fictional. In this movie, Heather Langenkamp, who portrayed Nancy Thompson in the earlier installments, plays a version of herself. The plot follows Heather, who begins to be haunted by a dark presence connected to the character of Freddy Krueger, but now in a more terrifying and supernatural way. The actors and characters from the original films, such as Robert Englund, who played Freddy, become versions of themselves within the story. In other words, Freddy is no longer just a villain in a horror movie, but a malevolent entity that has transcended the screen and seeks to destroy the actors who portrayed his victims. The movie starts with Heather beginning to receive unsettling messages and calls, and she soon realizes that she is being pursued not only as her character, but as herself. As the events intensify, Heather discovers that Freddy Krueger's character has come to life, breaking free from the fictional world of the movies and crossing into the real world. Freddy, now a nightmare demon, starts to attack those involved in the creation of the franchise. This version of Freddy is much more sinister and terrifying than in the previous films, as he represents evil incarnate in the form of a dark force beyond human control. What makes this film unique is the way it explores the relationship between reality and fiction. Freddy is no longer just the serial killer who haunts teenagers in their dreams. He is now a metaphysical entity that comes to life through the fear that the actors and the audience have created around him. The movie raises the question of whether evil in movies can transcend the screen and become real, which gives a completely new dimension to the character and to the saga as a whole. The tone of the film is more serious and psychological than the previous ones. The horror here is built through suspense, unsettling moments, and situations in which the space between what is real and what is fiction becomes blurred. Freddy becomes a symbol of the forces of evil that feed on collective fear, making the film a reflection on the power of cinema and fear in popular culture. As for the plot, Freddy gets closer and closer to Heather's son, who becomes the villain's ultimate target. Throughout the movie, Heather seeks to discover how to stop Freddy, who seems to have a direct connection to the nightmare he himself created. The movie turns into a race against time as Heather tries to save her son and herself, ultimately facing Freddy himself in a battle that takes place not only in dreams, but in the real world. Wes Craven's New Nightmare establishes a radical shift in how we understand the A Nightmare on Elm Street universe. While the previous films developed in a world where the characters were aware of their existence within a horror movie, in this installment, the characters are seen as real people facing a monster that has now transcended that fictional boundary. Freddy is no longer tied to the movie universe. He has been released by the fear of those who created him. Freddy vs. Jason is the epic showdown between two of the most iconic slasher film monsters. Freddy Krueger, the killer in dreams, and Jason Voorhees, the unstoppable killer from Crystal Lake. This film marks the first encounter between these two villains, creating an explosion of terror and action that keeps fans on the edge of their seats. Although the movie has a horror foundation, it is also known for its exaggeration, black humor, and visual spectacle. The movie begins with Freddy, who has been asleep for a long time, trapped in hell. In his domain, Freddy faces the inability to terrorize children anymore, as the survivors of the A Nightmare on Elm Street saga have stopped fearing him, and fear is what fuels him. Freddy decides he needs to return to the world of dreams to regain his power, but he faces a problem. The memory of the young people from Elm Street has disappeared due to the fact that the adults have erased any reference to him. His solution, something as bold as it is macabre, is to revive Jason Voorhees by making him believe his mother has ordered it, so that he will start a series of murders that will revive the terror in the town. On his part, Jason, a monster that doesn't think and only follows orders, becomes Freddy's tool. Freddy's plan seems to work at first, as Jason's killings once again fuel the collective fear, allowing Freddy to regain his power. But Freddy didn't anticipate that Jason would be more unstoppable than he imagined. Throughout the movie, Freddy realizes that his creation has gotten out of hand. Jason doesn't understand control and only seeks to massacre anyone who crosses his path. What begins as a collaboration between the two villains soon turns into a death match. Freddy faces Jason not only as the supernatural being who manipulates dreams, but also as someone who can no longer control a monster like Jason, whose only purpose is to kill. Thus, the movie becomes a battle of titans, with Freddy trying to use his intelligence and dream powers to defeat a Jason who cannot be stopped in the real world. The movie unfolds with a group of young people who become pawns in this deadly game. Some try to figure out how to stop both killers, while others become victims of the ongoing struggle between the two monsters. It is interesting to see how the characters gradually understand the magnitude of the chaos developing around them, and how fear and violence escalate quickly. As for the action, the movie offers brutal and visually striking sequences, where Freddy and Jason fight in the real world and in the dream world. These battles culminate in a final fight, in which both villains battle each other until an unexpected conclusion. Freddy vs. Jason marks a significant connection with the previous franchises by incorporating elements from both sagas, but with a fresh vision. Freddy is the classic Freddy, the dream manipulator, with his characteristic black humor and ability to distort reality. However, he is also shown to be more vulnerable, as he does not have absolute control over the situation due to Jason's unstoppable nature. On the other hand, Jason is more brutal and direct, true to his nature as a remorseless killer. Narratively, the movie plays with the power of fear, a recurring theme in the Freddy saga, while also exploring the concept of the inevitability of death that has defined the Jason saga. Freddy needs people to fear him in order to exist, but Jason needs nothing more than his instinct to kill, making him a formidable opponent for Freddy. Additionally, the movie connects with previous Freddy installments through references to the history of Elm Street and previous victims, like Nancy referenced in the story, and the town that lives under the memory of Freddy's terror. On the other hand, the Jason saga is also reflected through elements like Crystal Lake and Jason's indestructible nature, maintaining the tone of both franchises. The 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street remake had a clear goal: to modernize the franchise and introduce the iconic Freddy Krueger in a contemporary context. However, the movie also takes risks by exploring deeper and more disturbing aspects of the character, while reinterpreting the original events. Directed by Samuel Bayer, and with a new Freddy portrayed by Jackie Earle Haley, this version attempts to combine psychological horror with classic slasher elements. The story follows a group of teenagers who begin to experience terrifying dreams starring a burned man with a glove of blades, Freddy Krueger. As these dreams become increasingly violent, the young people discover that if they die in the dream, they also die in reality. As in the original film, the mystery behind Freddy is directly connected to the past of their parents, who executed him after he was accused of being a child abuser. Unlike the 1984 film, the remake places a greater emphasis on Freddy's backstory, explicitly exploring his crimes before his death. Here, Freddy is not just a dream killer, but his past as a preschool janitor and the child abuse accusations become the central focus of the plot. This more explicit approach to his crimes makes him even more sinister, but also more human, which divides opinions. Some feel that delving too deeply into his backstory takes away the mystery and terror from the character. The tone of the film is much darker and more serious than the original. While Robert Englund's Freddy combined sadism with black humor and witty one-liners, Jackie Earle Haley's Freddy is colder and more brutal. His mocking laugh is replaced with a more threatening tone, and his motivation is purely vengeful. While some fans celebrated this change for bringing back the psychological horror, others missed the sarcastic personality of the original Freddy. Just like in the original version, the remake explores how an unresolved past can return to haunt new generations. The protagonist's parents hid the truth about Freddy and his crimes, believing they had destroyed him forever. However, this silence is what allows Freddy to resurface, showing how secrets and past decisions always find a way to come back to the present. Freddy, as always, feeds on fear. However, in this version, there is an interesting twist. Freddy also plays with the memory of his victims. Through flashbacks and manipulations, the characters not only face Freddy's terror in their dreams, but also the repressed trauma of their past encounters with him when they were children. One of the strengths of the remake is how it intensifies the sense of despair by showing that the dream is not only a dangerous place, but also inevitable. The protagonists fight against fatigue and experience microsleeps, a visually striking resource that shows how, even when awake, they can be dragged into Freddy's world. This element reinforces the feeling that no one can escape. Although the remake tries to be an independent story, it takes key elements from the original film and the saga in general. Nancy Thompson, portrayed here by Rooney Mara, remains the protagonist, but with a more reserved and melancholic character compared to Heather Langenkamp's Nancy from 1984. In this version, Nancy must not only face Freddy, but also the weight of the repressed memories of what he did to her in the past. Some of the most iconic deaths from the saga are retained, such as Chris's death, inspired by Tina from the original, where she is dragged along the walls of her room by an invisible force. However, these deaths are presented with more modern effects and a more graphic approach. The remake also explores how dreams and reality intertwine. Some of the most memorable sequences, such as the use of microsleeps or the scene with the school hallway filled with ashes, pay homage to the surrealism that characterized the franchise, although without the same level of creativity. Now that we've covered the story in depth, I want to talk about Freddy Krueger's physical appearance, what we know about his personality and behavior, and I will explain his incredible abilities and known weaknesses. Freddy is the perfect example of how a villain's appearance can tell a story on its own. Freddy's most distinctive feature is his skin, which appears to have been severely burned. His face and hands are covered with scars, melted tissue, and exposed flesh as a result of being burned alive by the parents of Elm Street after discovering his crimes. This grotesque appearance not only reflects his tragic human end, but also makes him a symbol of his origin as a monster created by vengeance. The makeup in the original films, portrayed by Robert Englund, has an organic and detailed design with rough, wrinkled skin that simulates burnt flesh. In the 2010 remake, with Jackie Earle Haley, his face was designed to look more realistic, resembling a person with severe burns. However, this version was criticized for being less expressive and for losing some of the cartoonish charm of the original Freddy. Freddy wears a homemade glove with sharp blades on the fingers of his right hand, made of metal. This glove is his primary weapon and one of the most recognizable images of the character. He created it himself before his death while working as a janitor at a school, and it symbolizes his sadism and creativity. With this glove, Freddy not only kills, but also infuses psychological terror by scraping it against surfaces, such as pipes or walls, producing a high-pitched and disturbing sound that announces his presence. Each blade of the glove is designed to slice, making it a particularly brutal and bloody weapon. In dreams, the glove is often used in impossible ways, such as extending the blades or making them grow directly from his fingers, reinforcing the idea that Freddy is omnipotent in his realm. Freddy always wears a dark brown felt hat with a wide brim, worn and weathered. This hat has become one of his trademarks and adds an air of mystery and darkness to his figure. The shadow it casts over his face increases the tension in many scenes, making him more terrifying by partially concealing his scars. The hat also has a classic vibe, reminiscent of villains from old films, which gives his appearance an almost timeless quality. Freddy wears a red and green striped sweater, which, although simple, has an unsettling effect. According to Wes Craven, the creator of the character, the red and green colors were chosen because they are shades that psychologically clash with each other, creating a sense of discomfort for the viewer. The sweater is worn, dirty, and torn, reinforcing his image as someone who has returned from the dead. Additionally, his choice of ordinary clothing contrasts with his monstrous face and glove, making him seem even more perplexing, a supernatural being with a partially mundane appearance. Freddy completes his outfit with dark pants, usually black or dark brown, and heavy work boots. This detail, though simple, contributes to his intimidating presence, echoing his past life as a worker/janitor. The boots make noise when he walks, adding an auditory element that often announces his arrival in the dream sequences, a touch that intensifies the tension and horror. Freddy's eyes are small but piercing, often surrounded by deep shadows, giving him a chilling and threatening gaze. At times, his eyes appear to glow in the dark, signaling that he is lurking in the world of dreams, stalking his victim. In the 2010 remake, his gaze is more muted and somber, reflecting a more realistic approach to the character. However, in the original films, Robert Englund brings a wide range of facial expressions, from mocking smiles to grimaces of fury, which make Freddy both terrifying and charismatic. The way Freddy moves is a fundamental part of his design. He has a relaxed yet threatening posture, like someone who is always in control. His walk is usually slow and confident, reinforcing the idea that he is in no hurry, as he knows there is no escape from him in the dreams. When he attacks, he can become unpredictable, using exaggerated or even distorted movements, taking advantage of the surreal possibilities of dreams to make his appearances even more shocking. In the world of dreams, Freddy is not limited to his usual physical appearance. He can transform into anything, from a giant snake to a killer television, depending on the situation and the fears of his victims. However, even when he takes on other forms, his essence is always present, whether it's the sound of the glove, his chilling laugh, or phrases that reveal his personality. Freddy is, above all, a sadist. He enjoys inflicting pain and terrorizes his victims, both psychologically and physically. For him, it's not enough to kill. He needs to play with his prey, stalk them, and consume them with fear before finishing them off. His ability to manipulate dreams allows him to exploit his victims' greatest fears and traumas, pushing them to their emotional limits. For example, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, Freddy uses each character's individual fears to attack them. Taryn's addiction, Jennifer's insecurity about her career, or Will's desire to be a hero. These tactics not only show his cruelty, but also his ability to personalize each attack, making each death unique and twisted. One of Freddy's most memorable traits is his dark humor. Unlike other slasher genre killers like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, Freddy is talkative, sarcastic, and always has a witty remark or a macabre joke before or after killing someone. This trait makes him terrifying and, at the same time, fascinating to the audience. A clear example of this is his iconic line, "Welcome to prime time, bitch," in the third film, when he slams a victim's head into a television. This type of humor sets him apart and gives him a unique personality in a genre dominated by silent, brutal killers. Freddy is extremely narcissistic. He is obsessed with his own power and enjoys watching his actions cause chaos. In the first film, his main motivation is to take revenge on the adults who killed him, but over time his goal expands. He wants to be remembered as a symbol of fear. Freddy doesn't just want to kill. He wants his name to inspire terror, perpetuating his existence through memories and nightmares. In Wes Craven's New Nightmare, this aspect of his personality is further explored, as Freddy is presented as a concept beyond cinema, an eternal evil that depends on people's attention to survive. This reinforces his narcissism and his desire to be immortal. Freddy is a master of manipulation. He uses his powers in the dream world to deceive, confuse, and disorient his victims. He is extremely cunning and knows how to exploit each person's vulnerabilities. In Freddy vs. Jason, for example, Freddy manipulates Jason into starting a killing spree, allowing him to regain fear on Elm Street, and with it, his strength. Moreover, his intelligence isn't limited to the dreams. In several films, he is shown as someone who understands how people think and react, which allows him to always stay one step ahead. Freddy has no limits when it comes to causing suffering. His cruelty is reflected in his origin story. Even before becoming the Dream Demon, he was already a child killer. After his death, he becomes something even worse, a figure who feeds on pain, fear, and the souls of his victims. Freddy doesn't just kill for revenge, but also for fun. Each death is a spectacle for him, a theatrical act that fills him with satisfaction. This absolute disregard for human life makes him one of the most ruthless villains in horror cinema. Freddy is an almost omnipotent being in dreams. Within this realm, he can control absolutely everything. He can change the setting, manipulate objects, and make the environment respond to his will. This makes him unpredictable and terrifying. For example, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, the Dream Master, he turns Debbie into a cockroach and crushes her in a trap. Freddy can take any form that helps him terrorize his victims, like in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, where he becomes a giant snake or a killer television. He deceives his victims by making them believe they are in reality when they are actually still dreaming. After his death, Freddy becomes a vengeful spirit. His immortality protects him from physical harm in the dream world. Even though his enemies hurt him or even kill him in dreams, he always finds a way to return as long as he is remembered or feared. Fear is his main source of power. As long as his victims feel panic, Freddy grows stronger. This makes him more dangerous, with each victim who succumbs to his terror. In Freddy vs. Jason, his initial weakness is the lack of fear in Elm Street, which forces him to manipulate Jason Voorhees into reviving his legend. Freddy can enter the dreams of his victims and use their deepest fears against them. He understands the darkest traumas and secrets of his victims. Freddy turns dreams into nightmares where there is no escape. In the dream world, Freddy has superhuman strength, speed, and endurance. He is not limited by the laws of physics and can stretch his body, teleport, or use his blades in impossible ways. For example, in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddys Revenge, he passes through Jesse's body to manifest in the physical world. Although Freddy is extremely powerful, he has weaknesses that the protagonists have used to confront him. Freddy needs people to remember him and fear him to exist. If no one believes in him, or if his victims overcome their fear, he loses power. In Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy is unable to act fully until he gets the residents of Elm Street to fear him again. One of the most effective ways to defeat him is by bringing him from the dream world into the physical world, where he loses most of his supernatural abilities. This is seen in several films, such as in A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984, when Nancy brings him into the real world and uses homemade traps to hurt him. In the physical world, Freddy is vulnerable to wounds, blows, and normal attacks. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Freddys Dead, the characters try to erase his existence by eliminating all memory of him. Freddy depends on his legend to survive, so being forgotten is equivalent to his symbolic death. Victims who manage to confront him without fear or control their own dreams can overcome him. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, the characters discover special abilities within their dreams that allow them to fight Freddy on equal terms. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Freddys Dead, Freddy is defeated using a ritual that combines religious and psychological symbols to eliminate him. Although this method doesn't always work, it shows that Freddy has vulnerabilities against concepts like exorcism or emotional closure. Freddy also has his own traumas that can be used against him. In A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, the Dream Child, his origins, and the influence of his mother, Amanda Krueger, are explored, representing a form of redemption and resistance against him. Freddy Krueger is an incredibly powerful villain, especially within the dream world, where he can manipulate everything at will and exploit his victims' greatest fears. However, his dependence on fear and his connection to collective memory make him a being vulnerable to human emotions and the unity of his victims. In short, Freddy is as strong as the fear he inspires, but as weak as the courage of those who face him. And well, that would be everything we know so far about the creature known as Freddy Krueger. The first time I heard of this character was in an episode of The Simpsons when they made an episode based on Freddy's films. At first, I thought he was clumsy and lacked much depth. But later, when I learned about his origin and legend, I was fascinated by the entity they had created. But let me know your opinion in the comments. Did you already know Freddy Krueger's story? Do you think he was really a victim and could have been saved if he had done something in his childhood? And finally, if something similar happened to you, do you think you could face the monster of your dreams and overcome your fears? Share your answers to these questions and your general opinion on Freddy Krueger in the intriguing and terrifying universe of A Nightmare on Elm Street. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, share it to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of my new videos.